Thank you very much. And we're back. Good to have all of those who are joining us again for this part of the story, this part of the program, which is going to be on a little bit of health. Because, the Bible tells us that God wants us to prosper and be in good health. And the more I live in this world, the older I get, the more I'm starting to treasure my health. I've always valued it, but certainly the intrinsic value of health is becoming more paramount. It's good to have money. It's good to have money. It's good to have possessions and so on. But the intrinsic value of health is paramount to us on a day-to-day basis. And so today we want to continue on our journey of health, looking at the health, how can we be healthy? And we started on the healthiest people in the world, and we want to continue looking at why some people live to be so long, why some people live to be over 100 years old, and others die in miserable health. Well, there is a science with health and aging. So if you look at the graph, you see on this little graph which we've put up here, there are two axes. One is health span, the other one's your lifespan. So lifespan is how long you live. Your health span is how long you are healthy. So that's the difference between lifespan and health span. There are a number of factors that can influence your lifespan, and we talk about them. And there are a number of factors that will influence your health span, how long you can remain healthy. Now, there's no point living until you're 50, but you have every disease in the world. Then you're not healthy, your health span. And for most people, if you look at the typical Western person, they follow the green line, the green curve here. And you see that you start off very healthy, or particularly healthy when you're young, most people. And as you get older, your health declines as you get older. And most people, by the time they hit 80, they pass away. The average lifespan of a Western is between 70 and 80. Women live to be a little older than men, 81 or 82 on average, whereas men about 79. So it's biblically accurate that we live 70, and if by reason of strength 80. There are some people who live to be over 100, and we want to find out why. But the average person, by the time you hit 70%, if you look at the graph, by the time you're 70 years old rather, you lose 50% of your health within the next 10 years. That's what that graph is saying. You see? At 40, this top graph, the top end of the graph here, is where your health starts to decline. So at 40, your hormones start going down, everything starts, getting less, you're moving a bit slower, everything, your hair starts dropping out, or your hair starts getting gray, or you start getting wrinkles, or whatever. That happens at 40 for most people. And when you're 70, if you look at the graph, 50% of your health you lose within 70 and 80 years old. 10 years, you lose 50% of your health. Now, when you look at those who are centenarians, it is not that they're not getting some of the diseases we get. They still get the cancer, the diabetes, and so on. But they're getting it at a much older age. So for them, when they're 90 or 95, on this red line, they're able to push that health curve out. So when they're 90 or 95 is when they start getting disease. They start getting a little elevated blood pressure. They start getting a slight elevation of their blood sugar. They start getting a little bit of aches and pains. So by the time they're 100, 110, they're still in relatively good health. And so the big question we have to ask is, how do we shift the curve? How do I shift this curve from the green part to the red part? How do I move the curve to the right so that the disease starts later on? So here is what the wise man says, Proverbs 3 verse 8. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to the bone. So there is a concept of lifespan and health span in the Bible. You see, health to your flesh, strength to your bones. So health span and lifespan. Proverbs 4:20 and 22. My son, pay attention to my words, incline your ears to my sayings, for they are life unto those that find them. That's lifespan. And health to all their flesh. That's health span. So it's amazing that we as scientists, or in the scientific world, we're looking at the concept of lifespan versus health span, and that graph that I gave you so that you could see it. In fact, the Bible recorded that thousands of years ago, spoke about the difference between lifespan and health span. So the big problem that we have is that there is a break between lifespan and health span. There is a disconnect. So that as lifespan continues to increase, we're getting older, so there are medicines that we can use, or drugs we can take, or machines we can be put on, dialysis machines, ventilators, and so on. The parameters for health span have stagnated. In other words, we're living longer because of things that modern medicine is doing, but we're not living healthier. Our health span is not improving. So the big question we asked this morning is, what can we do to bridge the gap between lifespan and health span? How do I push health span along the journey with me on my lifespan? And that's the question I want to try and answer today. So there is a biology of science and aging, and it's called the study of senescence. And that's the process of aging that leads to increased death or mortality. And when we're looking at that, we say what's happening in the physiological and anatomical realm, what's happening at the cellular level, what's happening at the subcellular, biochemical level. All of these things are the things we look at when we look at the science of aging. So don't get too scared with some of these diagrams, because they are simple to understand. So when you look at deterioration, or the rate of deterioration, it coincides with the rate of your organ failure, your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, your eyes. All of these deteriorate, but they deteriorate at different rates. So for example, if you look at the blue line, 100% function capacity of the blue line, you continue to have pretty good nervous function all the way until you're 80, which is the dotted line right at the end. So you see where they match. Your nerve function generally, unless you've had a nerve injury of some kind, continues to function. You could still move your hand, you could still open your eyes, you could still talk, you could still blink, you could still walk, and so on. So your nerve conduction tends to maintain fairly stable over the years. When you look at heart function, the red line, as from the time you hit 40, 35, 40, your cardiac function starts dropping. Your hearing, look at that one, your hearing curve drops pretty precipitously as you start to grow older. Then your breathing capacity, the ability to hold your breath, drops fairly precipitously after you pass 40. Then you have your renal is kidney blood flow. That drops pretty dramatically from the time you're 40, 45. It starts dropping. So by the time you're 80, your kidney function is only about 20-25% normal, which is why you have to be so careful what you take, including drugs, but including some supplements. Be very careful, because your kidney function has decreased. Now, it may not show up on your blood test, but with the sophisticated tests we can do, we can tell you your kidneys are not working well. And of course, if you look at your eyes, by the time you hit 25, 30, 35, your eye function, the ability to accommodate and so on, loses rapidly, and you end up like myself wearing glasses. So age has an impact on your health. So when you're looking at factors that will increase your longevity, they can be factors that can go against your factors for aging. So as you get old, pro-aging factors will be loss of stem cells. You see, your stem cells not producing as they should. Your telomeres. Now, telomeres are funny ones. Telomeres we think they're the tail end DNA of a cell, and it seems to be what's called programmed cell death. Programmed cell death. In other words, it seems that each cell has built within it a lifespan, a lifetime, and that's controlled by something called a telomere, the tail end, the last tail of that DNA, and it determines how long that cell lives, and ultimately, therefore, how long you live. And so after a while, it doesn't matter what you do; those telomeres, they're chopping. Every time your cell reproduces, the telomere is called a snip. It snips itself off. It's like a scissor snipping off the end of that DNA, and it reaches a point when you snip so much, it doesn't matter. At that point, you die. So you see, the Bible says the wages of sin is death, and we actually have a scientific basis for it. Then there are hormonal changes that lead to, in the aging, an accumulation of cell damage and so on. So all of those things are pro-aging. The things that would help you in longevity, to live a longer, healthier life, would be things like DNA repair. There are things that would assist in the repair of your DNA. Stress responses, because stress is a killer. Monitoring and modulating your stress. Then you have antioxidant defenses, things that you can take to protect yourself. Protein and cell turnover, things that you can do to help your protein and your cell turnover to work well, and mitochondrial changes and exchanges, as well as a maintenance program. So there are things that you can do, and it is finding that balance between pro-aging and longevity. That's really what the objective is. Now, the thing is, now we were designed and created to live forever. That was God's plan. When you look at what God did for man, in the genetic code was built in the ability to live forever. No wonder David the psalmist in Psalm 139:14 says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Because we were designed to live forever. That was God's plan. Of course, something interrupted it. But that's called sin, and I believe that's why the telomeres are shortening, because God it's called programmed cell death. Now that tells me something, that you were programmed to live forever, but when man sinned, we got a program to die. So telomeres go through a programmed cell death. But over time, we have been living shorter and shorter. If you look at Methuselah, all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and then he died. He still died, but he lived to 969, almost 1,000 years. And you look at the great patriarchs of old, some of them lived to quite a long age, 930 for Adam. You have 110 for Joseph. You have 180 for Isaac, 175 for Abraham. 147 years for Jacob. And these men were still strong. They still had their health. You know, when Moses was 120 years old, the Bible says his eyes were not dimmed, neither was his natural strength abated. He had the strength of a younger man. So there are things that obviously over time has impacted on us, that has caused us not only to live a shorter time, but also to live less healthy. So the big question we ask is, there are some pockets of people who seem to be living exceptionally long on this earth. They're called the blue zones, you know. They are in Sardinia, Sardinia in Italy, in Icaria in Greece, you have in Okinawa, Japan, you have Nicoya in Costa Rica, and there's a group in Loma Linda in California. These groups of people stand out from among the rest, and they live longer. And what we want to try and find out is why they are doing that. What is this package of things that they're doing that's allowing them to live healthier and longer than the rest of us? Well, first of all, we have to say it is complex. It's complex. There's complex genes, genomic signatures. There are changes. So the big name is polymorphisms. Basically what it is saying is, as you get older, your genes are mutating. Complex genetic structures that are changing. But there are some people who are born with genetic signatures that do not predispose them to disease. No disease, no genes associated with that disease. So some genes govern your disease. And if you don't have those genes, you will live longer than the average person. You'd have a longer lifespan and a longer health span. So the other way to put it is, the best thing you can do for your health and for your life is to choose your parents well. If you did that, you'll be fine. Most times. So the genetic signature is important. Your genes, you're born. So your genetic makeup influences your life expectancy. So exceptional longevity, people who live longer than the average, tends to run in families. Siblings of supercentenarians tend to live longer than the average person. It's in your genes, ladies and gentlemen. You're born with it, some people. You're born with good genes in the sense of longevity and health. Some people, their genes are just not good. They're born with bad protoplasm, we say in the medical world. So the genetic factor is there. But, ladies and gentlemen, there are environmental factors in that also influences our health. So genetics is important, but there's environmental issues, there are dietary issues, and those have a great impact on the manifestation of disease in our lives. So when we're looking at health, the environment is what sort of things we're exposing ourselves to. The other thing is what about healthy eating? Healthy eating. And these things have an impact. So lifestyle choices can influence healthy aging. Your lifestyle choices can influence healthy aging. So even though you have a genetic factor, there definitely is a factor that controls our age. So what are some modifiable lifestyle factors that negatively impact on our life expectancy? What are the modifiable lifestyle factors that you can change, because if not, they will negatively impact on your life? Well, here are some risk factors. Sedentary, and in other words, laziness, high blood pressure, obesity or overweight, diabetes, and smoking. Those are 5 risk factors that can negatively impact on your life expectancy. And if you have them, you need to really work on it. So sedentary people, they get disused, they get frail. People with high blood pressure, they get strokes, kidney disease, cardiovascular disease. People who are obese, overweight, they get metabolic syndrome. That's akin to diabetes. They get cardiac disease, they get dementia, they get cancers. People who have diabetes, they get cardiovascular disease and cognitive decline, as well as insulin resistance, which of course produces a whole range of diseases on its own. And if you're smoking, then there's a higher risk of cancer, cardiovascular diseases, as heart diseases, lung diseases, as well as cognitive dementia and Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's disease or dementias. So that these are risk factors which you can control. You can modify them. So they're called modifiable lifestyle factors. So these factors you can control. So look at these factors, and it shows you that the older you get, the more factors you have, the greater will be your risk of dying. So if you have all 5 factors, your probability of survival, so it's probability of survival at 90 years old, percent probability. If you're at the top end, if you have all 5 factors, your probability of surviving is less than 10%. If you have 4 factors, 10%, 3 factors, 20%, 2 factors, 30%, and as the more you go up, the more factors you reduce, the greater the chance of you surviving at 90. Put it the other way, the more factors you have, the more risk factors you put in, the greater the chance you will not make it to 90. So it is modifiable, but it impacts on your health. So there is a connection between lifestyle and your age. So for example, when you're midlife would be like between 40 and 50. Late life would be like 80 and 90. And those factors are the same. So like BMI, your body mass, your obesity, when you're younger, midlife, higher BMI influences your lifespan very significantly, whereas lower BMI, the risk of death is less. High blood pressure, when you're midlife, non-survival and poor health is the outcome, and late life, it is poor health is the outcome, and so on. Smoking, alcohol, physical, all have a problem as you get older. Now, so we discussed the lifestyle factors that influence negatively bad outcomes and poor health. What are some of the things that will influence you positively? Well, it turns out if you're married, you probably live longer than if you're not married. Well, I have to qualify that. If you're married to the right person, you're married to the wrong person, you're in for a peck of trouble. Peck of trouble. But by God's grace, it turns out that married people live longer than non-married people. People who have high social contacts, in other words, going to church, going to a bowls club, going any sort of social activity, live longer than those who are hermits. Alcohol intake, have some studies suggesting that it increases longevity, but I think that's it's what's called the French paradox. It's not the alcohol that protects you, it's the resveratrol. It's the extract of the red grape that is the protecting factor. And I think that's becoming very evident now. Exposure to infectious diseases when you're young can cause disease, and if you're not exposed, then you have a higher chance of survival, and moderate physical activity. Now let me just put a note on that moderate physical activity. We're going to talk about that, the role of exercise. It turns out that if you're looking at exercise, that's an important factor. You have a lower chance of survival if you're dealing with light exercise. If you look at the first curve here, light exercise, your chance of mortality is reduced by 67%. However, the more moderate exercise, the more exercise you do, the more you are approaching somebody who has the same risk factors as doing no exercise. So if you're doing moderate exercise, your risk of mortality and sedentary goes down by 33% instead of 67%. And if you're doing strenuous exercise, it has the same impact as if you're sedentary. Isn't that an amazing research? So people who are doing a lot of exercise, overstraining themselves, doing massive amounts of exercise, turns out it is of no benefit to you in terms of your health. It is just as bad for you doing too much exercise as doing no exercise at all. Your chances of mortality are just as high with too much exercise as no exercise at all. So that's called the balance of hormesis. So you see, basically, the more exercise, so that's the curve, you get maximum benefit when you're doing moderate exercise. Time you get doing high exercise, there's no benefit to you at all. So ladies and gentlemen, let me just conclude that part there to say, exercise is good. Mild to moderate exercise. Daily exercise 5 days a week. The moderate exercise which you're doing, half an hour to 1 hour, 5 to 6 days a week is considered to be okay. Excessive exercise has not been shown to be helpful at all. It actually shows to be not helpful to you. So in terms of let's close up this part, in terms of accentuating lifestyle and factors, eliminating adverse ones, we would suggest doing like walking times. Walking is good and trying to walk as fast as you can and taking a stop. Walking fast as you can. Doing hand exercises. Hand grip exercises have been shown to reduce cardiac disease and stroke. But I think that's just because of the circulation. You know those little muscle things that you squeeze and breath, squeeze and pump, squeeze and pump. Those hand exercises have been shown to be very helpful to reducing your cardiac incidence and stroke. Amazing as it is. Simple as that. Low levels of depression and high report of satisfaction. You have better psychosocial indices, you do better. If you have lower blood pressure and your blood glucose is controlled and you have lower levels of inflammation in your body, you do better. So life and health span will be increased by as much as 10 years by controlling your exercise, your mental health, and your blood sugar and blood pressure. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop at this point because we want to give a break and conclude. But of all of those things, these are factors you can control. When we meet another time, we will talk about the impact of diet. Impact of diet. And what antioxidants can help you. Now, I think what I'll do, because of the time factor, when I start this afternoon, for those who join me, I will complete this lesson on the health secrets of the healthiest people of the world. So we will complete the last part on the role of diet and supplements before we do the latter part, the other part, which we talk about, a healthy bowel. Let me encourage those of you who can make it to have a listening on that subject. We are trying to get it on YouTube, so if you don't worry, we will try and get it on YouTube. But if you can get it firsthand, it's always better, because it turns out that one of the key elements to good health is your bowel, that which is neglected. Now, Paul says, he talks about the part of the body that has the least honor having the greatest value. He's so right. We don't see the bowel, it's all on the inside. But science is showing more and more that a healthy bowel is the secret to a long life and a disease-free life. They're now linking diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer to problems in the bowel. So this evening I'll talk about that. This afternoon I'll finish up this little conversation we're having on diet, the last part, and then we will go straight into the role of the bowel in health and disease. Really, really important subject. And it's not one that has been mirrored too often, but I certainly would like to share that with you.